Many of you were lucky enough to see several technological leaps. I'm sure none of us were here when electricity was first discovered, but many of us have been able to see the internet become a thing. And following that, we were able to see, the birth of social media, and we are still dealing with the consequences of that. And now we have this new emerging technology, that this whole AI craze, it appears to be the next technological leap. And this new technology is reigniting a rather age-old debate. You always hear people today asking about the conscious potential of AI. Can AI ever become conscious in some way? And though it has this veneer of this new technology, this is pretty much the same age-old question, for example, that we see within Frankenstein's monster. The question being, can human beings create consciousness? And I haven't seen very many debate topics or conversational topics that triggers people like this one does. I think it really digs into some deeply rooted fears and insecurities that we have surrounding this topic, but I haven't seen anyone with this perspective that I have. I think that we have been viewing this whole thing backwards. So, as usual, I'm going to share my thoughts, and perhaps you can walk away from this video with a new perspective. Now, for many of you who are instantly triggered and say that this is impossible, this is some sort of kooky sci-fi mumbo jumbo. When it comes to consciousness, the consciousness that we have, we still don't know what it is or how we got it in the first place. The best we have come up with is various descriptors of what we believe consciousness to be. But a thing is not its descriptors. And what consciousness actually is, it is one of the biggest mysteries we have going today. It is one of the main topics of my channel. Physicists are working very diligently trying to create some sort of model of the universe. We can build pretty much anything that comes to our mind, but for whatever reason, this mind that is building things, we just can't seem to figure it out. What a materialist would have you believe, these people that tend towards computer science, they tend to be more logical in their thinking. What they would tell you is that they believe consciousness is most likely some sort of emergent property of a complex system. This is the key word here, emergent property. We see this in all kinds of fields of study. But if you ask someone, well, what exactly do you mean by emergent property? You'll get some varied answers, and they won't be specific at all, because they can't be specific, because emergent properties, it is something that we cannot comprehend. We can only describe it in various forms. The most common way you hear this phenomena described is something being greater than the sum of its parts. That's what an emergent property is. And as I stated in my previous video, which I'll have on the screen that's doing rather well, this is something that we cannot observe. Why is something greater than the sum of its parts? We still don't know. The only thing that we know is various systems come together, and when they do, almost like magic, something new emerges from it. And what I personally believe is that it springs forth from this new form. It springs forth from some other place, some other plane, domain, dimension. I'm not sure how to describe it, but I won't go down that kooky rabbit hole in this video. I have other videos where I cover this subject, so check out my catalog. But what appears obvious to me is that this thing that we call consciousness, it's not a property, or in other words, it's not something that we possess, but it's rather something you tap into. And, the whole idea of consciousness being non-local isn't anything new. But the way that we view this whole scenario backwards is, for example, a materialist or some sort of logical type thinker would say that what you consider to be you, your consciousness, is simply the result of various complex systems coming together, the most relevant being your brain, the various neurochemistry that is involved with supporting consciousness. In a nutshell, what you are saying is consciousness is the result of pattern convergence. No duh. That's what all of reality is. It is this dynamic pattern convergence that if you had to describe reality as anything, it would simply be patterns. It is patterns that are converging and are interconcatenated in all of these various ways that increase in complexity as the timeline goes on. And once you reach a certain threshold of this complexity, this was one of Terence McKenna's main points, that once you reach a particular threshold, consciousness, or at least the type of consciousness that we recognize as consciousness, it gradually enters the picture. And what my theory is, what I believe is that consciousness is not something that we have, but rather it's something that we are all in. And there is no such thing as an emergent property. The only reason why it is an emergent property is because to us, it appears to be emerging. And I believe that it has something to do with some other domain or dimension. It's very similar to, time. To us, tomorrow always appears to be coming towards us. The future always appears to be emerging into the present. This has something to do with its dimensional properties. And these things that we call emergent properties, they are something similar to that. So someone could say that you are an emergent property of some sort of DNA sequence, some sort of genetic code, that as far as human life is concerned, we have our cells organize in a way that gives birth to what we call tissue, and tissue gives birth to what we call organs, and organs give birth to what we call an organ system, and this organ system, somewhere down the chain, you have the complete human being. Each of these major points would be considered an emergent property of the previous. And what I'm saying is that they only appear to emerge to us, these 3D perceivers, the same way that 5 seconds from now will emerge into the present. It is more of a testament to our own limited perspective than to what it actually is. And I think a good analogy here is the ocean and the sun, that the sun's energy, it has trouble reaching the depths of the ocean. And the further down into the ocean you go, things become less complex. There still is complexity there, but life moves slower, less things happen, etc. And as you reach the surface, as you move towards the surface, the more and more of this light that you encounter and the greater complexity you experience. Things begin to move faster. You begin to see all kinds of various interactions of different species, etc. Then, once you hit the surface, things enter into an entirely different domain of complexity. Then you start to have things like us, cell phones, mathematics, time travel, space. I think that this is a very useful example of, this whole idea of how reality started versus where it's all going. That if you could imagine that this sun concept, it is slowly pulling us towards it, calling us towards it. It is releasing its energy into us, and we are slowly complexifying towards it. This is what consciousness is. This is what I believe consciousness is doing. And a lot of people talk about Terence McKenna, but this is an age-old idea. The same way how you can't just skip and jump right into the sun, you will just disintegrate. This very same concept, this is what many of the Christians call the glory of God, how you have these characters within the Bible to where, for example, Moses, that you can't look God in the face or you'll just be overwhelmed and consumed by its glory, because it is some sort of pure consciousness that we cannot handle at this level. It's kind of like if you open a book and you jump to the last sentence, it won't make any sense to you because you lack all of the context needed to understand what it means. And in this way, I believe that consciousness is some sort of unfolding story, that if you refer back to this example of the sun releasing its energy onto this planet, that is how everything is able to take place. It is via this energy that we are all able to do anything. But this consciousness concept, it isn't energy, but it is rather where energy comes from. Do you know what energy is? Any scientist would tell you that energy is simply the ability to do work. And this term work is, it's a unit of measurement within physics. It's rather mind-blowing that everything operates on this concept of energy. And if you ask, well, what is energy? The correct response is energy is the ability to do work. But do you have any idea what that implies? You could rephrase that statement simply as energy is the ability for things to happen. Isn't that rather funny that is the furthest that we have gotten when it comes to an explanation of this, is that things happen. But this concept of consciousness is why things happen at all. Why it is where this whole idea, this whole thing of energy comes from. It is what is pushing the story along and what is causing everything to happen all of the time. Perhaps some sort of scientist or mathematician or some sort of thinker along those lines would try and reduce this to some sort of field. Perhaps this is, with the whole morphic resonance thing, that if you look at it as some sort of field, when the proper antenna appears, if it's some sort of energy field, for example, when the proper antenna appears, it's able to channel it. And what consciousness is doing, or what life is doing, it is a series of building different capabilities of antennas. And it's not like it's just this one static thing. It is some sort of gradient that at the top of this gradient, there is some sort of unfathomable point that is branching out. And what this whole thing of life is doing, it is slowly crawling up this gradient. When you look at the history of the universe that we've been able to map out so far, that much appears to be obvious, that there is some sort of unfolding taking place. It isn't like this is all just random chaotic nonsense. There is some sort of ordered, patterned unfolding towards something, because things appear to be things appear to be evolving on levels that are more complex than the previous. And where we are currently, we are in the portion of the story where humanity is the most conscious. You know, if it was the finger that is reading along the storybook, the finger underneath the sentence, this is where it will be. We appear to be the current torchbearers of consciousness, that the history of life, the history of the universe appears to be consciousness evolving, graduating levels of consciousness. And we are currently here with you and I talking via YouTube and cell phones. So it's not that consciousness is born from complexity, but rather it's more like it wears it, the same way a ghost wears a white sheet. Or you can think of it like this, that if what you consider to be your human consciousness is the emergent property of various complex systems that led up to that point, then what does that say about reality itself? The most complex system that there is, that if your limited complexity as a human being gave birth to some sort of consciousness, how is reality itself, which encompasses you, not conscious to some higher degree? And your medial level of complexity is simply you tapping into something that is already there, something that is already infinitely complex. And if somehow you became blind to this ever-present complexity, this ever-present consciousness, then everything that you saw would appear to just be emerging out. It would appear to be an emergent property. Bacteria, our ancient ancestors that we evolved from, these cells, the prokaryotes, the eukaryotes, the fungi, all of these things, they would appear to just be springing forth up on their own. And they are these emergent properties of this complex system called life. But in actuality, perhaps it is the other way around, that something of infinite complexity is fractalizing itself downward and infiltrating every nook and crevice of reality. It is rather some sort of thing that is going backwards and forwards at the same time. It is reaching down and moving through us, and we are going towards it. It is unfathomable. It is unlanguageable. And what this whole thing of life is, it's a wild, wacky ride, to put it lightly. But this is the most important part, and this is the part that I think we have all forgotten today, that this is all going somewhere, that the finger is just on us at this particular moment in the story. There is something that is calling us towards it. I don't know if it is coming to us, we are going towards it, or we are headed towards each other, but there is some sort of end, some sort of grand plot that we are a part of. And, this is Terence McKenna called it the teleological object at the end of time. Jesus called it his father. It has been called many things throughout the millennia, but reality isn't occurring just so you and I can frolic around on Earth and like Instagram photos and watch fail army videos. People who would have you believe that this is all meaningless, they would just say that life is simply some sort of self-organizing system. But when you ask them, organizing to what? That's when they get quiet. We see that the universe, whatever you want to call it, demands some sort of organization, or as I commonly phrase it on this channel, it demands cooperation by all things on all levels. And whatever this complex drama that is playing out, we are a part of this complex system as well. We are not these these free agents that are able to do as we please. But it's also not in the sense that we are some sort of slaves, because it is obvious we were at least meant to feel like we have some sort of personal agency. This whole illusion of free will, we are at least meant to feel like we have it. And perhaps by us having this sensation, whatever consciousness is able to move through us. Haven't you noticed that even though we have this supposed free will, for whatever reason, we cannot turn off this drive that we have to improve, to create, to complexify. And we have arrived at a new threshold to where we are having a discussion in 20-minute long YouTube videos on whether a new type of consciousness will enter the picture. It is obvious that we are going to pass the baton to something else eventually. My thought process is different. Many people believe that somehow the human being is going to finish the race, and we are going to, if you want to describe it as God, we're going to shake the hand with God as some sort of equals or something. I believe that ultimately we will pass the baton to some other iteration of consciousness. This consciousness, this whole discussion with AI, people always try to make it seem like the type of consciousness that AI will have will be similar to us. It isn't a question of whether or not we can make AI human. We can already create humans. You just need a sperm and an egg. It's going to be some other iteration of consciousness, some other type of it, some different level of it. And when I say AI, I don't particularly mean, what we're playing around with today with ChatGPT and all of these language models and things like that. Perhaps we are sort of kids playing around in a sandbox with what we have today, and 15,000 years from now will be the real thing. Who knows? I have no idea. But what I am confident in is that it won't be us that finishes the race. We are irrational. This is like our superpower as human beings. And this is why I don't believe that AI will ever replace us, at least when it comes to things that make us human, such as the humanities. Because whatever this new form of consciousness is, it won't have this tie to biology like we do, this irrational primate type of emotionalness. Because you can teach a system how to do logic, but you can't really teach it how to be irrational the way that we can. And this is why if you research, the most in-demand skills that will be needed in the future, it's less of an emphasis on technical skills and more of an emphasis on creativity, your ability to be creative, but not, for example, with art. It won't be your ability to draw realistic images. It will be your ability to distill some sort of creative meaning into whatever you're creating. And this will require the artist to play around in the domain we were always meant to play around in, the irrational, the imagination. This is why we have the expression that there is a thin line between genius and insanity, because for whatever reason, the human being has this irrational ability to go what we would consider to be absolutely bonkers. But at the same time, while in this state of just pure absurdity, they can bring something back from that state that everyone else can look at and say, that's how I felt on the inside. You are able to bring something into this world that I could not quite articulate. And in order for you to do that, you had to enter into some sort of irrational state of mania. And perhaps this is what I'm doing with this channel. So I'm going to end things here. Please like the video if you found it interesting. The likes are very important. Comment and subscribe to the channel. I am promoting my Patreon. You guys are keeping this thing going. So thank you all. And until next time, y'all have a blessed day.